Hey everyone, and welcome back to ExtremeRigs.net. Today we are talking about an unfair direct comparison between the CaseLabs SMA8, which is here, and the case behind it, which you can see is just a slightly taller here, which is the Corsair 900D. And I'll explain why I think it's unfair in a little while. But first let's talk about why it's also fair. Both cases have a similar functional design, and by that what I mean is they both support high-end motherboards, they both support quad radiators, and they both support radiators mounted in the top and side mounted in the base here. They also both support dual power supplies. And you can do things to mount a radiator in the front as well. So in that sense, functionally, they are very similar, and that's why we want to compare the two. So first of all, let's move this out of the way so you can also see the 900D. Like I said, the 900D is a little taller. What's hard to see with the angle of the camera here, but I've lined up the backs of the cases here. It doesn't look like that because of the perspective. But the 900D is also about 1 inch, give or take, less in depth than the SMA8. And we'll see what that leads to in a little while. So let's move the SMA8 out of the way. In both cases, we've mounted the very popular Rampage 4 Extreme motherboard. Put this in an angle so you can see a bit more. The 900D does support larger form factors. It also supports HBTX. If you have an old SR2 board, this does support it. To say that the SMA8 doesn't support it is true. However, there is a very similar version of the SMA8 called the SMH10, which you would get if you want HBTX. So in that sense, again, basically exactly the same functionality here. On the 900D, you have one choice for a window. As you can see here, it's slightly darkened. It's a slightly smoked plexi, or acrylic, I'm not sure the exact plastic, but it's slightly darkened. In the CaseLabs, you get a choice. You get either clear or many different colors, or smoked again. Although the CaseLabs smoked is darker. Anyway, so you get the door with the window, and again, there's one size of window. In the CaseLabs, you get to choose the size of your window. And when you choose the size of your window, you're saying, do I want to expose just the motherboard or more than the motherboard? So let's go ahead and open this window so you can see what's going on inside. There's a push button at the back that should release this, and then it's supposed to just pop out. You can see it kind of coming out here. There we go. Out it comes. So if you've seen the SMA8 review, I have a real hard time saying the name. If you've seen the SMA8 review that we did last week, you'll know a bit more about what the SMA8 has. With the 900D, we have the motherboard mounted here, and you'll see there are more slots here. Because it's HBTX compatible, you get 10 slots, which are only used for HBTX or XLATX. You'll also see that there's no, I'm not sure if this is helpful, let's turn it around a bit. You'll also see, this way, there's no mid plate down here. In the SMA8, you have a plate here to separate the lower chamber from the motherboard chamber. And this will be one of the most popular mods people do using this case, is to put a mid plate in and maybe light it up, maybe do something funky there. But that is a major thing that Corsair could have put in, and really the only reason I would say that they wouldn't do that is cost. The other feature we have inside here are the front mounted stuff. You have 4 5¼ inch bays here, and above that you have the USB panel and microphone and headphone. input and outputs. Here I've mounted 2 of the hard drive cages. Each cage is removable. You get 3, and you can mount them in the base if you don't want radiators, or you can mount 2 of them here. Mounting 2 of them here just gives you that flexibility to use the bottom chamber for the radiators. So, you know, that's plenty really. There's very few people who want to use more than 6, hard drives. However, the positioning of these is not ideal. As we'll see in a minute on the SMA8, they have a clever mounting system, which means you can mount hard drives without taking up this potential front bay space that could be used for radiators. If you want to mount a radiator in the front of the 900D, you can remove these and kind of attach one in there to the existing fans. However, this cage is not removable. This is riveted in, and you're going to have to drill those rivets out if you want to mount a big radiator in the front. So that's the main chamber here. The lower chamber, this door, there's a little catch here, but that's really to be able to pull it out. This catch doesn't really hold this thing in. This is really only held in by magnets. And this little clip thing, plastic thing here, really destroys the look of the panel. So it does make it somewhat ugly. As we fold it down, you'll see there is a dust filter, and it's magnetic. That is a nice touch. Magnetic dust filters are easy to clean and remove. If you've seen any of the other CaseLabs videos, you'll know CaseLabs do not include dust filters at all. And that's because they don't want to charge you for anything that you may not use. Corsair is the opposite. They're trying to include everything. So that is a nice touch. If you want magnetic filters on your CaseLabs, of course you can buy them. Dempsey Flex make kits for a lot of the CaseLab cases. So you can do that, and they'll even do custom ones if you want something else. So again, it's something that doesn't really separate the cases, but because it's included, the Corsair is going to get points for that. You can also see, well, you probably can't see because black on black is hard. If we tilt it like that for the light, you can see there are mounting points here. And these are the radiator mounts. And there's a top piece and a bottom piece. And you can see with these holes, these lower ones are for 480, and there are upper ones to mount a 420. I both like and dislike this. I dislike that it's a 2-piece setup. You have one for the top and one for the bottom. And the way they clip in, you kind of have to slide them sideways on these little hooks. That's kind of a pain. Basically, you have to attach it, slide it in place. There we go. And then you mount your radiator to it. What I would have liked to have seen is a one-piece system that was very quick to release and attach to the radiator, so you could pull out the radiator and the mount very quickly. I would have loved to have seen that. And that would be more along the line of what CaseLabs does. So this mount is disappointing. The only good thing I can say about it is that it does support 420s and 480s at the same time. However, the CaseLabs supports a 560. As we said before, the SMA8 was about 1 inch longer here, and just that extra small amount of room means it has space for the 560. This case, on the other hand, is more inefficient. You see these big, thick bars here, front and back, and that's a lot of wasted space. So that's stopping you from fitting a 560 in here. A clever modder could fit a 560, but as it is, you can't. So that's the lower chamber. The top, again, there is space for radiator mount, and this top here again, it takes a bit of getting used to remove the top cover. Again, it is a fairly easy to release dust-proof cover, so you can easily take it out for cleaning. That's nice. I like what are these called? Things that you can collect the dust on, dust screens, whatever you want to call them. I forget the technical name, but you know what I mean. The fact that these are easy to release. And I say easy to release, it did take me about an hour to work out how the hell this thing came out. The instructions were pretty bad. And again, we have a mount up top. And you can see, again, this is set up for 480 or 420. You can see the closer inner mounts for 480 and then the wider separating marks for the 420. On the CaseLabs, on the top, you can only fit a 480, even though there is space for a 560. You know, and that is a point in favor again of the 900D. Sadly, this radiator mount is not removable. That is something that CaseLabs did on the SMA8, but not the SMA8. So in that sense, both cases are the same on that point. If we look around further to the front, only have a small table here to work with, so it's kind of hard to keep it on. At the top here you have a drop-down panel, which is nice and clearly labeled. You have headphone, microphone, 2 USB 3, and 4 USB 2. And those are all pre-wired with nice black cables so that you don't disrupt the theme of the build. Excuse me. Underneath we have the 4 drive bays. Now you can see the front here is a very clean look. Actually, I'm going to rotate this further for you to see. Hopefully, let's get the lighting right on that. And if it falls off the table, it falls off the table. So you can see it has this kind of faux brushed aluminum feel on here. These are plastic, while this bottom plate is metal. But they do a good job of making it look the same, even though you can see when the light kind of shines on it, it does reflect differently to this bottom panel. These are removable covers. And you can see they're fairly wide. They're wider than you'd expect for a 5¼ inch bay. And as we remove them, you see what's going on here. The cover goes the full width. However, a real 5¼ inch bay is less. So when you mount something in here, it looks a little odd because you have this extra gap on the side and it's no longer flush, and that looks a bit ugly. So if you are using this case, I would really suggest do not please mount anything in the front unless you're going to do some kind of stealth cover for it with the existing bay cover, because it will look ugly. So unlike the SMA8, we get these input-output options included. That's a good sign. The fact that these are not flush is a bad sign. And the fact that this space cannot be converted to a radiator is also a bad thing. So, +1, -2. Underneath here we have this big aluminum panel. And this panel is just primed for being modded. You can take this panel off and you can just, go to town with a jigsaw, cut out some fancy pan, maybe powder coat it or spray paint it. I love that they made this easy to remove. And principally they did this because, yes, there's another dust filter. The word that I was looking for so long a few minutes ago. And again, it's quickly removable. You push in at the top, it rotates down, and you can see there's some Corsair fans that come with the case. With CaseLabs cases, you do not ever get any fans. And that's because they feel, again, if they included fans, they would have to increase the price. And you may not like those fans. Corsair, on the other hand, make fans. So they want you to use their fans anyway, and they're willing to throw them in, even if it's a bit of a loss. So the one thing I do like about this dust filter, it has these sides to it. Because with this panel getting pretty close to this, a lot of the air actually comes in the side here rather than the front. So it's just kind of trying to remove the restriction that the dust filter adds. Let's pretty quick again to put this back in. And you can see here with these fans, you can see the drive cages behind here. And you can see that it's fairly easy to mount a radiator behind here if you want it. Right now, directly behind these fans, we have the Harddrive cages. So again, if you want a radiator in the front, you have to give something up. The SMA8, on the other hand, as we'll see, doesn't have that compromise. We also get some nice design elements. You see this gap around the edge, and you see these kind of feet on here. It gives it a kind of beefy, serious look. When you look at it, you feel not intimidated, but you know it means business. With the CaseLabs SMA8, even though it's a very similar size, you get a different feeling. You get a feeling more of a workstation. While this wouldn't really come off as a workstation, as more of a serious gaming machine. And that's disappointing on the CaseLabs, because if anything, builds that use CaseLabs are normally even more high-end and more serious business and more crazy than what would normally go in a 900D. The other thing to say about the feet, on large builds like they get heavy quickly. Even this case is heavy. I can show you me trying to lift it. Obviously I'm not that strong a guy, but this is a seriously heavy case. If I keep shaking this, I'm going to get out of breath because it isn't light. And that's without anything in it. So one thing a lot of people like to do is to be able to put wheels on a case. When it gets this big, wheels are useful. Oftentimes a case like this is so big it can't fit on your desk anymore. You can see we're having difficulty keeping it on this table. CaseLabs has wheels as an option, and that sounds kind of dumb and stupid, but they're actually really useful. They do look a little nerdy, does take some of your street cred, but on a big case like this it really makes sense, so do think about that as well. As we go around the back of the case, the back of the case again is kind of a mirror of the front. Everything is very symmetric, and that means that the following thing is a bit of a shame. This case, for cost reasons, at least I imagine cost reasons, is not reversible. You cannot swap this panel to the other side. You could mod it, but there is nothing you can buy, there is no version of this case that exists where you can rotate that. So if you want this on your desk with the window facing you, you have to organize your room to make that happen. And if you can't do that, well, tough luck. Now with CaseLabs you can buy either version. So again, that's another point in favor of the CaseLabs. So continuing on to the back here, you can see we have a lot of cutouts here for cabling. You have the closer ones for ATX cases, and then the further out ones for HPTX. And you can see there's just holes all over here. Not only for cable routing, but for fan routing or tubing, for CPU sockets. And that's great, it gives you a lot of flexibility. But what it does mean is that this panel is a little flexible. And that sucks if you're trying to mount a heavy reservoir on there. Whenever things move and vibrate around, that's a bad thing. You'll get harmonics, you'll get noise that you shouldn't otherwise get. The other thing to mention here is the two Harddrive cages here are different. One is pre-wired, so it's actually more like a hot swap drive, while the other and the third are unwired. So that's just a little cost-saving thing that Corsair have done. It's nice that they made one of them almost a hot swap, but I kind of wish they were all the same and still hot swaps. Having said that, the SMA8 with the Harddrive cages there are not hot swaps. If you want a hot swap, you have to buy one aftermarket and put it in the drive bays. Again, we have the little release catch, which I still think ruins the look. And you can see on this side we have a flat cover rather than the perforated cover for air. Now this is removable. I kind of like having it if you're not using the airflow, because it means you're not getting airflow in unexpected directions, and it gives it a bit of a cleaner look. As we fold it down, you can see again, you have another radiator mount down here. There we go, now you can see it better. So, you know, included in the price, unlike CaseLabs where these mounts are extra, you can mount radiators on both sides of the case. And that's great. Like I said, I hate the actual mount itself, but the fact that it's included is nice. Again, you see all these extra wires in here from the front panel. Again, all black, all color coordinated with the case. Nice touches. And the last thing to say about the black is, that is the only option. Now modders have, of course, you know, painted versions of this case, and you'll see other colors out there. The only one you can buy today from Corsair is black. And we do hope they'll release more colors in the future. Certainly a white one would be very attractive. More so, I would say, than the black. So let's take a look at the back, and then we'll do more of a comparison to the SMA8. So here on the back you can see you have the rear exhaust fan, and again there's no filters on here, and you can see this whole area is pretty open. And so you can see the case was designed with airflow in mind, and only one type of airflow. It's designed to have all the air coming in from the top to a radiator, all the air coming in the front of the case, and more air coming in into the lower chambers, because those all have the ventilation. And so you're running that positive pressure where a lot of air is forced into the case through the dust covers, and then you have this back area where air can escape quite easily. And you run enough fans so that air just flows out here and never comes in this side. So that way you keep dust out a lot more. The downside to that is, well, what if you don't want that setup? What if you want your air to flow a different direction? Well, Corsair doesn't really let you do that. So again, you know, one of the recurring themes we'll see is flexibility versus cost. Returning to the exhaust fan here, the one that's supplied is a 140mm fan. There are holes for a 120 if you want, if you have preferences. You also see down here, if we can get some light on there, there are two power supply mounts. There you go, now you can see it. One has a cover fitted and one doesn't. And you can see the two power supplies are fairly close. And it's worth pointing that out because we'll see it's very different on the CaseLabs case. This is because there is not that much clearance. Again, Corsair has been fairly inefficient in the usage of space. These corners are fairly thick, and that translates to less room in the body. And that means the power supplies are mounted closer together, and that means you have less radiator clearance. You also have less radiator clearance up top than the SMA8. So again, flexibility versus price. To say they both fit 480s is misleading. The SMA8 is more compatible with more radiators, with more thicker radiators. However, if you are okay running thin radiators, the 900D will fit them. So, the single last thing I wanted to talk about is perhaps going to be the most annoying thing to build with in this case. On the CaseLabs SMA8 and on the predecessor of this case, and you may be thinking I'm going to say the 800D, the mental predecessor of this case is really the Silverstone TJ07, and that's the case that really kind of came up with this original design where you have the motherboard here and then you have that bottom chamber with a 480 mount, and then maybe you fit a small radiator at the top. The TJ07 was full aluminum, and it also had a motherboard tray. And the motherboard tray is important because it means you can set up everything. Particularly if you have water-cooled graphics cards, you can set up all your tight loop in there, you know, outside of the case, and then slide the tray in and just hook up the couple of connections that you need to. That's not a huge deal if you have good access to your motherboard. But in this case, you have stuff blocked. You have these drive cages in the way, and you have these thick pillars. Now, let's say you want to change a graphics card. Let's rotate the case so you can kind of see what's going on here. You can just about see there are thumb screws in here. Well, thumb screws are fine when they're loose, but when they're tight and you want to get a screwdriver in there, you have to go at such an angle here, you can't get a screwdriver in. So rather than fix the real problem, and the real problem was that they don't have a motherboard tray, Corsair said, okay, let's give you a little tool. So if I grab that tool, it's basically like a little Allen key with a screwdriver head. So they said, okay, we know you're going to have problems. Here's a shitty little tool to help you undo these things. And this, using this thing, will drive you nuts. You know, once you've actually installed your rig and made everything good, you'll say, okay, you'll probably forget about that. But if you're someone who rebuilds their rig often, or takes it down for maintenance frequently, changes things up, that is going to drive you nuts. This is a very affordable case, and it's a very good case, but building in it will drive you nuts. It is not an easy to use case. So we've talked about the flexibility and the ease of use as the real two negatives on this case. There is really only one way to set up this case, and if that works for you, and if it's going to work for you in the future, great. It's affordable. On sale you can get this less than $300. And if you compare that to the SMA8, the SMA8 starts at $560, but that's without a lot of options. Once you've added a lot of options, you'll be in the 600s. Once you add on shipping and tax, maybe you may end up north of 800. While this, with shipping and tax, you might get it under 400. So the SMA8 is twice the price. So in that sense, this is a good deal. The problem with this case is, if you're on a budget, you probably don't need something this big. And so the biggest competitor is actually Corsair's own 750D, which is a little smaller and a lot cheaper even still. It's more in the $100 to $200 category. So if budget is a concern, take a look at the 750D because it's almost a better case, particularly for the money. So we're done with the 900D for now. Let's move on to the SMA8 just so you can directly compare. Alright, you can see again we have the motherboard in here. This is an XXL window, so you see a lot of stuff. You can get smaller versions. The windows, the doors I should say, somewhat easier to work. You don't have a push button release. There's some clips that hold it in, and out it comes. And here you can see the versatility because it's so open. You have this whole space where before you had drive bays that you had to have. You had hard drive mounts that you needed. Here it's like I have a hole because you don't necessarily have to use that space for anything. In reality, you want to, and you will. As we take off these other panels, you'll see in the base here, we have a radiator mounted, and this is a 560. Again, the 900D doesn't support a 560, and the 560 has a lot more area than the 420 or the 480 that the 900D supports. That's a nice touch. Sadly, the top doesn't support it. The other thing is, because the space efficiency is greater, you have a little more clearance up top to mount a radiator. So you can run slightly thicker radiators before you hit the top of the motherboard. Now, that doesn't mean you can fit any radiator as is. If you have a very thick radiator, like an alpha cool monster, and you want to run push or pull fans, you can't fit this under here. However, as usual, CaseLabs have options. You can get a taller top and then mount the radiator outside of the frame. So you always have options with CaseLabs, and that's one of the reasons you're paying the money. You're also paying the money on the weight. This thing is thick aluminum, but it still weighs in much less. This case feels about 10 pounds less than the 900D, and I have a radiator in here that I don't have in the other one. So that's nicer when you're moving the thing around. And like we talked about, the motherboard tray is huge. Instead of having to fit the motherboard tray in there, you undo a couple of screws, one at each corner, and it slides out, just like that. So you can set up your rig on the motherboard tray and then slide it in. And that, if you change your rigs often, will be a lifesaver. The amount of frustration you will have not having this will be surprisingly high. So we talked about the top where you can only fit a 480. Unlike the 900D, we don't have the option for the 420, which is disappointing. However, we do have more cutouts. We have cutouts for tubing and fans in a more useful way. The 900D ends up with all these cutouts in the back panel that are almost excessive. These have ones where you want them and not where you don't. Moving on to the front panel, you'll see there's no USB or headphone inputs or outputs, and that's not an option on this case. A lot of the CaseLabs cases it is. Here it's not. You have to buy an aftermarket 3.5-inch drive bay compatible unit, and then there's a different plate, but essentially it fits in here. And that's somewhat annoying. It would be nice if, CaseLabs made that an option to include that with the shipment, rather than you having to go and Google, okay, which one do I need? You know what I mean? And the real reason, the other cases they do have a panel you can buy already. And the problem with this case is just it's so deep that the cables don't reach the motherboard. And that's kind of disappointing that's the reason. I feel like they should have found another option for that. In the front here we have 3, 6, 9, 12, 13 possible 5.25-inch bays. And that compares with the 900D's 4. Now you don't have to use them all, and that's the beauty of the flex bay system they have here. You can get adapters to mount a radiator instead, or more hard drives if you want. So the capability of the case is more. If you want to define it as more radiator space, well, that's more than the 900D can do. If you want to define it all as drive bays, well, the 900D can't do that either. If you want to fill it with 100 hard drives, 900D can't do that either. However, the 900D covers 90% of what people want to do. So for 90% of you, you might save money by buying it. Now on the 900D we talked about how the hard drive mounts were useful but also not that useful because they took up additional space that could be used for something else. CaseLabs already thought this through and said, you know what? We want a lot of space for cable routing behind here. And this is significantly more than what the 900D has. In the 900D, you're going to struggle to close the door if you use extensions. If you have sleeved cables and you use sleeved extensions, the extra bulk from those connections are going to take up a lot of the space in the 900D. Here you have buckets of room. I mean, this thing is deep. This area is so deep that this hard drive cage here, you can fit two 3.5-inch full-size mechanical drives in there. That's how deep this is. You can fit 4 SSDs here. You can fit the 3.5-inch front bay adapter in there. It's just a ton of space, and that's why this case is significantly wider than the 900D. And as we go on to the back, you'll see how this also helps. Let's get some. So here you can see now your power supplies, again dual power supplies on the base, however they're much more widely spaced, and that's because the useful space here is wider. And you want your power supplies widely spaced because that means more clearance from the radiator. You can run a thicker radiator. And given the overall extra width of the case, it gives a lot more clearance for when you're running a radiator on both sides. We already showed you the 560 on this side. On the back side, we have a 480 mount that is with no radiator in there. So, these radiator mounts aren't free. They don't come with the case, unlike the 900D. However, you have the flexibility. Do you want a 560, which the 900D doesn't want? Do you want both sides? Do you only want one? With CaseLabs, you only need to buy what you need. So they're trying to minimize the cost to you of buying stuff you don't want. However, it gives a different buying experience. It means, rather than saying, okay, this is my price for the case, you have to figure in this is the price of the case, but I need this extra thing and that thing and this other thing, and it adds up. So again, comes back to flexibility and ease of use versus price. So now that we've stacked these two cases next to each other, you can see just how much wider the SMA8 is, and that's really useful space. It's not big for the sake of being big, it's big in order to fit functionality, it's big in order to free up space for radiators. So the theme that I've gone over again and again is flexibility versus price. The 900D is cheaper, and it includes more stuff, for the base model. The SMA8 comes very bare, and you have to add on a lot of things. So the end cost is almost twice the price for the two. However, overall, the Corsair will drive you nuts, and the feeling of quality between the two is different. You feel the fact that the 900D is steel and plastic, and from the feel of it that it's made, with budgets in mind. This is not something that's made, like a Ferrari, where it's like the best possible thing it could be. It's made to hit a certain price point. It's made in China. This one, on the other hand, yes, it's not got the curves of a Ferrari, let's say, but it's not made in a compromised fashion. It's made out of the better materials. It's made with better ideas in mind. So you kind of have to ask yourself, what's my budget, and really, how long am I going to keep the case? How often am I going to reuse the case? And really, what case am I going to want to have in 5 years if you're planning to keep it a long time? If I was keeping a case for 5 years or more, I would definitely go with the SMA8 over the 900D. The extra price in the long run is not that large compared to the parts you're putting in it. If you're only building a budget computer, then ignore these cases completely. Neither is right for you. But if you're building a high-end rig that's going to cost thousands, I think it is a fairly legitimate comparison, just because they have similar functionality, and the real difference is the price and the quality and the flexibility. Having said all that, like I mentioned before, the main competitor for the 900D is the smaller, cheaper 750D, because generally you're going to look at the Corsair if you're on a budget, or if it's hard to get CaseLabs in your country. For the CaseLabs, the biggest competitor is really either the smaller SMA8 from the Mercury lineup, which has more features at a lower price, or the even bigger STH10, because for some of you, this is not enough space, and you know who you are. So that's also why it's an unfair comparison, because in reality, you may not want either of these cases. However, for the niche markets, they are still very good cases. And at MSRP on both of these, we gave them both silver awards because they're good for their price. We think they could do things that would be better for the price, but they haven't, so that's why we went with silver. So that's all I have on this comparison video. Again, like the video, subscribe to the channel, follow us on Facebook and Twitter, it all helps. And let us know what you'd like to see more of. That's it from Stren and the Extreme Rigs team.